Yes, in this part of the article, they focus on the example of Europe. There is a generational turnover in the electorate, where nowadays we have three cohorts of different generation voters. We have the interwar, the baby boomers, the X generation, and the millennials. Older generation is still majority of voters. If we take the baby boomers and interwar, this is still majority of voters. And as we'll see, those cohorts of baby boomers and interwar are the generations, more old generations, that tend more to vote to these authoritarian populist parties. So here the authors measure voters of authoritarian values, and they distinguish between authoritarian values and libertarian values, because they also consider that it could be the populism could mix with authoritarian values and with libertarian values. In libertarian values mixed with populism, we find maybe other left-wing parties, like for example we have Syriza in Greece, or we have Podemos in Spain, or we have the Front Insoumise in France, or even we can consider the Democrat candidate Bernie Sanders as an example of populist libertarian values. I mean, the voters with authoritarian values, they think that it's important to behave properly, to follow the rules, to live in secure surroundings, that the government ensures safety against all threats. Tradition is very important for them, and they still believe that the people should do what they are told, that they should follow rules all the time, even when no one is watching. But those who have the libertarian values think that they like surprises, and they're always looking for new things, for adventures, and like to take risks. They think in new ideas. They like to be creative, to do things in their original way. It's important for them to take their own decisions, to be free and not dependent on others. And also they think it's important to listen to people with different views, even when they disagree with them. So they have in general more open-minded. So authoritarian values among voters predict support for parties with authoritarian policies. There's a tendency that those people with personal authoritarian values, they tend to vote more and more those populist authoritarian parties. So you can see the graph. Another interesting graph talks about education. Education also predicts authoritarian votes. So a low education, there is high probability for people to vote for populist authoritarian votes. And when the education is higher, there is a lower tendency to vote for those kind of authoritarian parties. So authoritarian values predicts a very important percentage of vote for authoritarian parties. Here we have examples from different countries. Mistrust predicts also populist voting. So the idea of the mistrust also predicts the populist voting. But here, as I said before, we can find on one side those authoritarian values and those with libertarian values. Populist values also predicts an important percentage of vote for more populist values, or populist parties. Here we have the tipping points in values by cohort. So we have on one side the cohort of birth. So since we move, from the 90s, 40s, 50s, 60s to the 80s, to the millennial generation, there is an increase in tendency of the libertarian values. The people younger, they have more libertarian values, and the people older, born in the 20s, the 30s, the 40s. I mean, the more old those voters are, the more probability to vote for authoritarian parties and to have authoritarian values. So here we can see there is the cultural clash or conflict between those two cohorts. In the United States, here we find the trends in social liberal and conservative self-identification, and we have again that the millennial generation self-identified more with social liberal values. Then we have the Generation X, and then the baby boomers and traditionalists are those increase with those with more older and those generations, the older generations, trying to identify more with conservative values, as you can see in the graph. Here we see again the different generations, and we can see the same. The millennials, let's say born since the 80s, they tend to be more moderate or more liberal than the Generation X, and the Generation X more than the baby boomers. And then we have the interwar, when we find a very high degree of conservative values, 48, and the lowest degree of liberal values, 17. So those voters from the interwar generations, being born from the beginning of the 20th century until the 45, more or less, they tend to vote to those kind of populist authoritarian values. And then the baby boomers. Here we have the Trump vote by moral conservative scale. So the more conservative, I tend, of course, to vote more for the Trump. Again, we can see the graph, the moral conservative scale in the sense of opposed moral change. The moral conservatives predicts Trump vote. Here we have the graph and the difference according to the tendency to vote to Trump or tendency to vote to Clinton in the last US presidential elections between those two candidates, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. So those who oppose moral change tend to vote more Trump, and those with more liberal values tend to vote more Clinton. Here with Engelhardt also has this those studies on the World Value Survey, where he noticed this movement from the millennial generation towards more post-materialist values, and the older generation, according to his study, has more materialist values. And here we find the same ideas, that those with post-materialist values tend to vote more to Clinton, and those with more materialist values tend to vote more to Trump. Here you have the generational difference in job approval, much wider for both Obama and Trump. Again, those with millennial and Generation X approve less, which says more to Trump administration. Here we see another graph talking about the percentage of Trump vote by income, and we see that those in middle income, but also lower income, we have household income. Those with lower household income tend to vote more to Trump than those with higher household income. Here again the Trump vote by generation, interwar generation, then baby boomers, then generation X, and the less voters for Trump we find on the millennials born since 1980. So finally we have the conclusions in this document. Age, education, urbanization and cultural values predict vote for authoritarian populist parties in Europe. Older, non-college educated, rural areas with more authoritarian values drive European voting for populist authoritarian parties. Wider change, tipping point thesis, rising tide of social liberalism in the population, but slower shift in the electorate threatens socially conservative authoritarian voters. Identities around faith, family and nation. Period's effect of economic condition and social diversity reinforces these threats, especially since the economic crisis in 2008, and now with all the effects of economic globalization, delocalization and others, more unemployment, etc. Those economic conditions also increase the vote for those populist authoritarian voters. And parties and leaders respond by heightening and reinforcing cultural threat perceptions to mobilize support. So thank you very much. I'll continue to upload videos like that. Please continue studying all the documents and preparing the readings for the practical classes. Thank you very much.